Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish authors of all types and genres. So if you have a manuscript all ready to go, or maybe a story still in your head, or even 300 pieces of loose leaf shoved in a drawer, yes, we get envelopes of loose leaf mailed to us constantly for publication. You're not alone. Just visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I am so thrilled to be joined today by three authors who have undoubtedly unleashed themselves. Author Cully Mack is piping in all the way from England to talk to us about A Voice That Thunders. I think you're going to love hearing all about this fantasy book. Melody Lipford is a poet, and A Diary of Psalms is a Christian poetry chapbook meant to inspire you. And Debbie D. Louise from New York is here speaking about Time's Relative, her new time travel novel. So I'm so thrilled to have three fabulous authors. Please welcome Cully Mack. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to have you. Love that accent. We Americans love hearing that accent.
Thank you.
Especially we New Yorkers who have much harsher accents than you. That's
and Long Islanders.
And Long Islanders, yes. Our accents don't sound nearly as smooth as that.
Oh, mine doesn't sound smooth to me.
See, isn't that funny? We all like somebody else's accent better than our own. That's the thing.
I think I sound like a farmer.
No. See, to an American, I think you sound like a princess.
Oh dear, that's funny.
You sound amazing. So
thank you.
First how you got your start in writing before you tell us about A Voice That Thunders.
I'm a very late starter to writing. I started around 2012, somewhere around there. My mum had just retired, and she went to go on a writing course, just a brief 12-week beginner's course, and I decided to tag along, and I absolutely loved it. I just think that in my mind, I'd always assumed writing was for the professionals and not for just an ordinary person. And I just loved it. I created my first character from a profile, and then I had to give him a story. And that character never left my head, and he rattled around in my head for a couple of years. And then I just left my job. I went back to university and I studied English literature and creative writing. And that's where part of my first book came from. And then I stayed on and did a master's in creative writing, because I just absolutely adore writing. Love it.
Oh, I love hearing this. Oh my God. What an inspiration to get a late start.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've always been an avid reader.
Really?
I've always been an avid reader, but I just didn't ever think it was a possibility for just an average mum, basically. So it was yeah, definitely. It was almost like I'd found my reason for being on the planet.
Oh my gosh, do I love hearing that. What did you love reading before you became a writer?
I've always read fantasy. Just the way that it opens up the imagination just really inspires me. But I also read a lot of other genres. And when I was at university, because I did English literature, I read everything from the 1600s up to the present day. So yeah, so I've got quite expansive reading.
Oh, you are definitely our poster child for it's never too late.
It is never too late. If you've got a burning desire, go for it.
And you didn't even know you had a burning desire till you got to that class.
No.
Okay, so you're also our poster child for continuing education.
Oh yes, going back to education. I think I was 44 when I went back to do my degree. I'd have to go and check it out. It was somewhere around there. And that was a unique experience, I must say. The younger population was so welcoming. I was lucky. The university that I went to they were just very open-minded, and they were really accepting, and they didn't really, well, they were just brilliant. I loved it. I'd like to stay there forever.
You know, we have a lot in common, Cully, because I also went back to school, not quite that old. I was in my 20s when I went back to college, and I studied English literature.
Oh, brilliant.
At W Post, and then I went into library science. I'm a librarian. So, but I was, older than the average co-ed. I didn't start at 18. I was a secretary for a while. So I started at around 23.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, I didn't have the opportunity to go to university when I was younger. And before I knew it, I was married and had children, and it just wasn't really something that was the opportunity that I could take. But as I went back later in life, it was perfect timing for me. And I had the opportunity, and I went with it. It was scary. I have to say it was scary, especially when you've been having a wage, and I had a good job and I had a good wage. Right. To let that go and take that risk was terrifying, but I don't regret it, not for a second.
Oh, God, I love hearing this. This is just absolutely fantastic, and probably exactly what someone needs to hear today.
I'm sure it is. I think my motto now is basically just live your dreams. Whatever your dream is, whatever you're inspired to do, doesn't matter whether it's writing or whatever it is. That's why you're here. Go for it. You're
right. Live your dreams. Life is short. Yeah. If this past year has taught us anything, it's that we don't know what tomorrow holds. So do it. Good for you. So these characters that are in A Voice That Thunders have been with you since you started that degree, or when did they come?
That character his name is Ammo. He's a little bit of a rogue. He's not a pirate, but that's the closest stereotype I could really associate him with. He was the character that I originally wrote. And then when I started writing my first book, I actually wanted a younger protagonist because Ammo's around 30. I wanted a younger protagonist, and I ended up with two siblings. And I just couldn't let Ammo go. He just needed to be in my book. So he ended up, he's a mentor figure to the younger sibling, the boy. So he's in my book, and he likes to take over the page. He likes to, in the second book, he has his arc gets a lot bigger. He's very, very confident character, but so that was how I initially started.
I love the way you speak about he likes to take over the page,
he does. So we probably talk about it a bit later if you like, but I learned, I didn't know what the terms were when I went to university. I've learned that I'm a discovery writer. So I don't always know what's going to happen on the page until I start writing. I don't know what the characters are going to do. I tend to give them a conflict, and then as I'm writing, them working out how they're going to overcome that conflict.
They call it a pantster.
Pantster.
That's how I write mostly. I try to overcome that a little bit, but I still write that way.
Well, it's funny. I like the way Cully called it a discovery writer. We call it a pantser, and it implies you're flying by the seat of your pants, which is a little bit negative to me, like unplanned. The way Cully said it, she is a discovery writer. That sounded much more positive to me. I like that.
We also use the term over here, like architects and gardeners. For the architects and more the people that plot, and the gardeners and more they just plant the seeds and see how they grow.
Oh, very nice. I like that. Yes, I like that much better than pantser.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So give us a little synopsis of this story for our viewers who are unfamiliar.
Okay. So I've sort of got a tagline for the whole series because I'm now writing the 5th book, but which is, if I can remember it, it's, so I've actually forgotten it. My brain's gone blank.
Okay.
I'll enter a world where monsters crept into the world, where myth was born and magic first breathed. So the whole theme of my book was looking at Mesopotamian mythology. So I'm quite interested in mythology, and I wanted to go back to the oldest myths that we had, and they just happen to be in Mesopotamia. And there's a lot of crossover with sort of Semite and biblical texts as well. So, and that is where my antagonists came from. They came from another realm into like our world, but around between 3,000 and 5,000 years ago, and they were basically conquering the world. And so they came through these portals, they're conquering the world, and as they expanded, they ended up moving into territory where my two protagonists are, and they are two siblings. One is called Gabe, and his older sister is called Mira. In my prologue and my first chapter, they both get separated. There's an incident at their clan gets slaughtered, and they are separated, and then their arcs diverge. So you've got the brother Gabe, which is a bit of a chosen one sort of trope. He's been called to do this, to take on these immortals, but he doesn't really want to do it. All he really wants to do is find his sister. So, and his sister, one of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to write characters that were very near to the antagonist. I didn't want the antagonist to be some like dark lord, mysterious dark lord on another continent. So, and that was my purpose for his sister being taken. She is taken along with several other girls as tithes to one of these immortals. And when she gets there, she believes her brother is dead, and she starts this new life in this new world. And then as the story goes on, she finds out a lot of what she's involved in and what she's learned isn't necessarily what she thought it was. And it just expands from there. It goes into the big conflict and big war and lots of relationship issues with people falling in love, people falling out of love, people dying. So it just grows from there, really.
Well, especially when you're a discovery writer, things just go to all sorts of places, can't they?
Yeah, it is like that. I mean, in the second book, I knew that I wanted to take one of the characters into the other realm. So I sat that up towards the end of the second book. So in the third book, two of the characters, actually three of the characters are in the other realm throughout the whole of that book. It's one of the arcs, and that was really fun to explore. So, and as I said, I based it on Mesopotamian mythology. So there's a lot of the immortals, they would call themselves gods, but they're not gods. They're not gods at all, but they set themselves up as like false gods. And so yeah, I mean, it would take me a long time to go through the Mesopotamian mythology in my books. It's quite in depth.
Did you have to do a lot of research since you
I
just
did
so far?
But I'd had 4 years studying at uni, and I did a lot of my research for my master's was based on how to embed mythology into like fantasy text. So
okay. So you were actually getting school credit for while you were doing, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, the prologue and one of the chapters later in the book I used for my dissertation, and then Mira's arc, for the first 4 or 5 chapters of Mira's arc, I used for my master's.
Wow.
So
very cool. Very cool. Is there a doctorate in your future too?
Do you know, I have considered it. It's not off the table. It's just when I finished university, I thought I better just earn a bit of money for a little while so that I could start marketing my book. I actually got laid off from work during the COVID the situation because I was managing a project, and obviously we couldn't have all the people together. So so I'm actually redundant. So I've gone into full-time writing a bit sooner than I anticipated.
Gotcha. Okay. So what are you working on right now?
I'm writing book 5 in the series, but I'm also writing a short story about 10,000 words, which is set in my world, but it's about a character that only has a very, very small paragraph in my first book.
Oh, okay.
And I've written the story about him. That in my book, the perspective that this character is in is told from one of the major characters' perspectives, but I wanted to see this other character's point of view. And I'm writing it because I've been accepted to participate in an anthology of stories based on retired heroes.
Oh.
So that's why I'm writing that. I'm also writing a collection of short stories myself, which are all based on different myths, and just retelling different myths, and it really focusing on the woman's voice.
Wow.
So and obviously doing my literature degree, as you probably know yourself, doing my literature degree, you just see a lot of patriarchy in a lot of books.
I was gonna say,
I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't class myself as a feminist as such, but I have seen in literature a lot of patriarchy and how it has changed and evolved and adapted throughout the centuries, and how that has limited the women's voice in literature. And so a lot of the stories that we know have all been told through this patriarchal lens.
right.
So I want to strip that away. Not necessarily, it's not really feminism as such, it's more, for example, if you think of the witch in all the fairy tales, she's always the antagonist, she's always the evil person. And so one of my stories is, well, what if she wasn't? What if her voice was suppressed and everything that was said about her to control her and her voice, because she had something to say that men didn't necessarily agree with?
Right.
And if she had the opportunity to speak, what would she say?
Interesting.
So that type of thing. So I've done a story about that, and another one about from Greek mythology about the siren, and another one about
that mythology through the women's perspective. That's something.
It's very interesting. I'm just about to start one on another character that is a real character. She was called Enheduanna. She's actually the first ever poet ever written down in our ancient history, is female, and you never hear about her. As she was a priestess in one of the temples I can never say it, in Indiana. But even all our ancient poets, they all studied her work, because obviously the Sumerians created language, they created the written language. And so her poetry and a lot of other things that she wrote, we've still got them. But nobody could translate them for years, and now they can.
My God.
And so the first ever recorded poet,
love that,
is a woman.
Love that.
This sort of thing. So I want to write her story.
Well, I want to read it when you write her story.
Thank you.
And I love hearing about that. Our next guest is a poet who I'm sure is dealing with a lot of ancient texts herself, since she's writing Christian poetry, and one of the most ancient texts, of course, being the Bible. So please welcome Melody Lipford. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thrilled to have you. Love your background there with the dove. And tell us how you got your start in writing and this collection.
Wow. Thank you so much. So I've always had a knack for writing. I grew up very introverted, very quiet. I really love the poet Maya Angelou, and I've found comfort in her story Why the Caged Bird Sings. And when I couldn't find a voice, words were it. So I wrote from a very early age, songs, poems, anything. And Diary of Psalms it started my senior year of high school. All the poems I wrote then, during college, after college, and during the pandemic, I had a bunch of extra time on my hands. So I combined my favorite poems, 7 years worth, and made them into Diary of Psalms. So it's my little diary of how my faith has helped me spiritually, mentally, emotionally, just getting through life.
Oh my gosh, that is just fantastic. A collection of 7 years of work of yours. How did you organize it? Like, did you like think, okay, I'm going to go kind of chronologically, thematically, how I'm going to inspire other people through this work? What gave you that? Because organizing a poetry collection is never easy. What was your thought process?
Yeah, so I'm self-published. So I'm kind of a discovery writer in the publishing world, kind of discovering this whole process. So I organized it there's 8 chapters in the book. And there's like from chapter 2014 to chapter 2021. So like chapter 1 through 8, and it's like the year of 2014, and then it just goes up year by year. And each chapter has a different amount of poems. They're not all equal. I put a lot more in 2020 because I thought it was kind of cool to show how faith and poetry and writing can really help your mental health and kind of document the pandemic in a way. And how I handled it was through writing and faith. So
Absolutely. I love that. What would you say to other people who are considering gathering their poems? Maybe they have them scattered all over notebooks and things like that. What would you say to get them started?
yeah, I would say I was like that too. I had them in my phone, I had them in notebooks, I had them in laptops from 3 years ago. I was trying to find poems. I would just say find as many poems as you can and just organize, rearrange, read through, make edits. And when you think you're done making edits, make more. When you're done, there probably will
For no
still
edit.
be edits to be done, but you have to eventually be okay with things not being perfect. And as long as your heart and your message is in your story or your poem, that'll really come through the reader. But I would say it's better late than never. Because
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's a really fun process to look back and see how you've evolved as a writer. Because my poems from 2014, I'm like, ooh, they're a lot better now. So, but I wanted to show that in a way too, so people could see like the growth of a writer and the growth of your emotions and your maturity and spirituality.
Yeah, that was brave of you to put in those ones that you might have looked at now and said, not so good. But you said, you know what? I'm putting that in there. I want people to see a progression and growth and know that if they're over here, they're going to eventually be over here. Very, very, very inspiring for people to know about. What's next on your agenda now that you've published this? Do you just keep writing more? Did you discover something while you were doing it, like maybe a theme you want to go with or something?
Well, it's super recent. I just had the book come out April 4th, so it's
Oh,
just about the month in yeah. So it's super recent. So just promoting Diary of Psalms. I've made stickers. I have like my family has a produce stand, so I want to sell more copies of those. I'm already trying to start working on my next poetry book. I would love to write. I also was an English literature major in undergrad. And I would love to one day eventually write on Appalachian literature because there's not many writers who do that. I recently wrote one called Nanny's Kitchen that was published in an anthology last year. And it just kind of goes through just culture and traditions and just my experience as an Appalachian and just the family structure of that. So I'd love to talk more about the mountains, nature, and just a lot about this culture that we don't hear about anymore. So.
Gosh, you're absolutely right. I haven't even heard of that. Your book is selling at you have a fruit stand, did you say, or a farm stand?
No, it's my mom and my stepdad have a produce stand called Henry's Produce. And so they actually work with the Amish and they sell like Amish like buildings and they sell produce. And also, yeah, it's a lot going on. I just bought a she shed the other day. But I'm also gonna put in a little like sell some books there. So it's a cool little community place. We're trying to bring our community together. They opened it during the pandemic, which is crazy, but it's working and we are just bringing fresh produce to people and just in a pretty impoverished area, which is pretty cool to see because we take food stamps there. So they can get a good book, they can get good food, and we can help promote, people food scarcity and also help promote literacy at the same time.
You are making me want to get in the car and ride to Western Virginia to check this out myself.
Come on down.
I definitely want to come on down and check that out. Anytime there's produce and poetry at the same stand, I am all about it.
Yeah.
So tell me about your writing. Are you a write in my phone kind of a girl? Are you on paper? Are you in notebooks? Where do you do all this writing?
I'm kind of just like when the thought hits, you better get it down. So whatever's around me, most of the time I've had notebooks for forever, but I usually have a notes app. And if I get a thought, I'll write it down as soon as I can, then I'll transfer it to paper or my laptop. It's just whenever I get it, I best write it down because if I lose it, it's gone. So.
Oh, fantastic. And are you said you felt like you were a discovery person yourself. This is kind of evolving as you go. It wasn't a blueprint of what to do first.
No, not at all. I had no clue. I thought I was going to start off writing an Appalachian poetry book because I had got that Nanny's Kitchen poem published. But then I realized I had so much poetry based on my faith, and I'd written a lot just for fun. I kind of follow like little Instagram prompts, and you can do like Insta poetry, and if they like it, they'll feature you. And so I took some of the poems I'd written on Instagram and put them in the book too. So I just kind of discover what I'm going, what I'm feeling. I'm kind of like the gardener. I liked the way Cully described it. And you just kind of see what fruit is producing in you and kind of see what it grows into.
I think that's fabulous. Leah, you never say the word pantser on this show again now that this whole discovery and gardening and all these positive connotations going with it. It's so much better than I don't know what I'm doing and I just kind of wake up and see what happens. That's kind of what I was thinking before, but now it just sounds like being open to where things move you. And I think that that's so much better. I love that, Melody. That just sounds great and super inspiring. Well, for viewers who are not lucky enough to drive by that produce stand in Western Virginia, Melody Lipford poetry.wordpress.com. So she is getting it together there so we can find that book and the next one to come. Our next author today, Debbie D. Louise, is the author of Time's Relative, a time travel novel. Debbie is also a librarian. And if you watch my show enough, you know that I think librarians are next to God and how much they know and how helpful they are to writers. So please welcome Debbie. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Oh, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And not only are librarians, goddesses in pointing you in the right direction as a reader, but so many writers I know tell me about the librarians around the world who have helped them with research and have helped them to find things for their books and where they should be going for inspiration. So as the advocate for all librarians, Debbie, thank you.
You've got the dream job.
Thank you for a job well done.
Oh, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the storyline for those not lucky enough to have read it yet for Time's Relative.
All right. Well, I normally don't write time travel. I normally write mystery. And although there's mystery in the book, but you might consider it science fiction, a little bit of fantasy. But the timeline is that there is a librarian. She's the main character. I also have a librarian as the main character in my Cozy Mystery series. Because, of course, it's easy for me to write about librarians. What can I say? Basically, Samantha Stewart is looking for another job, though, because she had a bad experience on her previous job. She worked in New York City, and she had a relationship with someone, and it broke off, and she was seeing him at her job. So she decided to look for something else. She thought it would be easier that way. And she comes across an ad in the paper for a position at a software company. And it entails research. So even though it's not a library position, it's a high-paying position, more than she's making as a librarian. And it also involves travel, and she's interested. She would like to do more traveling, and she wants to find out what it's all about. So in the paper, it indicates that there are 2 days for interviews, and it gives an address where the interview is taking place. But she, of course, as a librarian, she researches everything. So she does a little background about the company, find out more about them. And she discovers that the president has been missing for several months. So now this worries her at the beginning because she's a little reluctant to go on the interview. But the person who is conducting the interviews is the vice president, who is now the acting president of the company. I'm not going to go into the whole details of the story because I'd like people to read it. But there are cats in the book. There are always pets.
Always cats.
Yeah, I mean, I have Sneaky the library cat in my Cobble Cove Cozy Mystery series. I usually have a subplot with cats or a feature. I've had dogs in my books too. I like to feature pets. I think people like to read about them. But the time travel theme, when I wrote this book, and you know about this, Stephanie, I wrote it in 1998, and that's when the book actually, that's the timeline for the book. It's happening in 1998. Now, the advantage of placing it there, I found this book during the pandemic. I actually found the manuscript for the book. I was lucky enough, because it was printed, to have an old file on the computer. So I was able to edit it. Now it had a lot of the formatting was a problem because it was an old file, but I was able to update it into the current Word, and I was able to edit it. But then I decided, as I was going through it, I had a thought maybe I should just like update it to the current time. But then I said, wait, it's a time travel novel. This is easy enough to keep it in 1998 and have her travel forward, and back. And so I did, and because everything there is so funny, some of the things it's over 20 years. Some of the things you don't realize that have changed in 20 years. There were no cell phones, all right, and there was a smoking section in the restaurant. There were different things that we don't have today, or that are not common today. Anyway, so I kept that. There was what was it? There was a different browser, Netscape browser. There was different things, Word Perfect was the big program, not Word. Okay. So all of these changes. So I kept it, but I did edit it. I changed it a little bit. And then I added, what I did was, because at that time, of course, I didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. I didn't even know 9/11 was going to happen.
Right.
So I added those events, because when she goes forward in time, not only does she see her future, her personal, what's going to happen to her, which is a big part of the plot, because it involves, possibilities that might happen to her. Not a positive thing that's going to happen, but there's ways you can control the future, not change the future, but every day you make different choices that can affect the future. So that's the theme of the book. But anyway, she does also see into the future later on in the book. There's glimpses of what might happen, and we have 9/11, we have the pandemic, we have the different things that happened after 98. All right. So but most of the book takes place in 98, and there's a detective, and because it is a mystery as well as a science fiction story, as I said, and the vice president of the company, and the antagonist is the president, who's missing, Jane Oldsfield, and she is traveling back and forth in time, and I'm not going to go into more details, but that's basically the plot. And there are things that happen to Samantha. She actually does go back and forward into time, and gets involved with the two men. And that's another thing. Now, at the end of the book, there's an option which readers will see for a sequel. And I'm seriously thinking about it. Serious. But I have so many other projects. But that is something on my agenda in my to be written.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, I absolutely loved that you were, I guess in my head, I picture you were cleaning your house and cleaning your files during the pandemic, and you found a book that you had written and had not yet published.
It wasn't the only one. There were others, but that was
gracious.
But that was the one. Oh, I have notebooks and notebooks, but that was the one that was on computer. There might be others. I haven't really looked through everything.
Wow. Melody, Cully, did you ever clean your house and find a book, or what's the best thing you ever found cleaning your house? But Melody, I suspect you found poems all over the place.
Yeah, not several books worth, just several poems to make it. That's my goal, is to be like Debbie. So that's goals for the future.
And you could just stumble over a book. Well, Cully found a whole new profession by accident. So yeah. I think there's that. But boy, Debbie, you make me want to clean my house a little more thoroughly.
I wanted to add, because I didn't add this before, for Melody, that I have also been dabbling in poetry. And during the month of April, I entered this competition to write 30 poems during the month of, actually started writing them in March. But anyway, during the month of April, I wrote 30 poems on the topic of cats. I wrote, I want to make a chapbook out of my poetry about cats. And I devoted it to different, all about cats, my own cats I've had. Each book, each poem is different, and I'm submitting it for a competition. But I was able to do it. I forced myself. I didn't do a poem each day, but I tried to do almost a poem a day.
And some days you had to do 2 to make up for the days you gave up. I think that's great. Well, lockdown has had its positives when it comes to writing, that's for sure. You know, even Cully, I know that you ended up losing a job because of lockdown, but it gave you more time for writing, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You know, certainly at our publishing house, we have been publishing like mad cakes ever since the pandemic because people are writing off the charts. It's one of those what I'll call a pandemic positive. You know, one of those things that have come about is that people are suddenly discovering a love of writing and really getting it done. And some are also cleaning their house and reading.
More people have been reading.
People are reading, people are writing, and people are cleaning their house and discovering a book someplace. I don't think I'm going to find one in my house, but you never ever know. Now, Debbie said something interesting that I want to ask Cully and Melody. Debbie generally writes mysteries. She's written a number of other things, but generally she's in with cozy mysteries. This was a little deviation to go with a time travel book, but yet she kind of stuck with some of the themes that she loves, like there's always cats in her book. So Cully, if you were going to write something completely different in a different genre than you usually go, what genre would it be in?
Oh gosh. I have done that in my books, to be fair, because I started to write epic fantasy.
Okay.
And I had no inclination whatsoever to write romance. It's not something I've read. It's not a genre that I've read at all, and I never intended on putting it in my books. But for some reason, my characters wanted a little bit of romance, and they wouldn't listen to me, and I just had to go with it in the end.
Sometimes they don't.
So my books, the plot is not romance. It's not a romance plot, and I can guarantee there is not happy endings for everybody. But there is definitely some real romance arcs that I have never intended to write, and I just can't seem to stop. They just keep going there. And so I mean, I do punish them. Like Ammo, for example, he's not the type of guy to settle down, so I thought, well, what's his worst fear? Settling down. So I've sort of like might make him at least face that fear. But yeah, so I mean, when I was at uni, I pretty much did write in most genres. I like travel writing.
Okay.
But I did it more with a creative flair to it than just writing, you know, that I went here and these are all the top spots to go and see.
Right. No, of course.
So I do enjoy travel writing. I always used to say that I was never a poet, always. Even if I read a book and it had any type form of lyric in it or poetry, I would naturally skip over it. I just had this block where I couldn't read it. And when I was in uni, I had to do modules on poetry, and the thought of it terrified me. But I actually can say that I do enjoy poetry. I don't understand, even now, I don't understand all the rhythm and the iambic, whatever it is. I am dyslexic, and it leaves me being tone deaf, so I'm terrible at doing the counting and the rhythm. But I have read from beginning to end I like epic poetry, so I've read all of Paradise Lost.
Wow.
I loved The Wasteland, Eliot's Wasteland. So I do, and I have written poetry. I've got poetry published. I was trying to remember where it was published, and I've forgotten. It's an American publishing company. It's only one poem. It was based on a true story about the last person that got hung over here for being for treason in the Second World War, which was slightly outside of my genre.
I see that.
Yeah.
Melody, how about you? If you're going outside of your genre, where are you going to go?
I've always loved historical fiction. Like when I was 8 years old, I loved reading books like in the 1800s. So I would love, and like I especially love the show Outlander, which obviously set in Scotland. And I did like a DNA test when I graduated Emory and Henry. And I know it's so small, but I was like 22% Scottish, and I'm like, wow, that just really so I went digging through my family tree, found my clans, and I think it'd be really cool just to like, I don't know, write historical fiction or even time travel. I always loved reading that when I was a kid. So those two genres would be really cool.
That is fabulous. I love it. Now, while I have three discovery writers together, what do you do when the discovery stops? The proverbial writer's block question. Do you have any tips to get around that? How do you get those voices in your head to keep talking to you if they won't talk to you? Melody, how about you? You look like you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like I'm currently in that process because I just got this book out, put a lot of effort, and when you like get a book out, you're like, oh, well, I'm tired. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just trying to get back out in nature. This pandemic has had me on the computer a lot for my job, for writing. So just getting back out in nature and just like seeing colors and trees and the different elements of the earth, like that helps really just center me and gets me back to writing and observing.
Ooh, great thought. I love that, especially now that the weather will get nicer. Debbie, how about you? What do you do when the voices stop talking to you?
Yeah, that I do that also. I like walking. I think that any type of exercise and just taking a break, but also I write little things, if I'm not writing a book, I start writing up. It could be a poem, it could be a short story. And I don't even have to finish it, but it's just something to get, you know, I go away from the other project. So whatever I'm working on, I just give it a break and then I go back to it, basically.
Great, great. Cully, you've been writing nonstop for a couple of years now with all
Yeah.
going on. Have you ever had that kind of a writer's block, and what do you do about it?
I have. I've just experienced it, and it's awful because I literally wrote for 4 years non-stop, quite obsessively. In fact, I used to send my family away and say, you can't come and visit me now because I'm too busy with my head over here. But when I finished my last book and published it in, I think it was October, so September, October last year, I stopped writing for a month. There was some issues going on with moving and things like that, which delayed me from, because normally I would just start the next book. And I stopped writing, and it really threw me when I went to go back to it. All the trains of thought that were in my mind, even though I had some of it written down, when I was reading it, it looked like it was alien to me. I just couldn't grasp where my head was with it before. And I really struggled with how to start the book. I knew once I'd got started, I'd be okay, but the actual starting of it was just horrendous. And writing this short story for this other project has really helped, because it is in my world. It's a character that I never would have written about, but it is in my world, and it's helped me to get my head back into that place, into that space. So I'm just tweaking that story now. So when that's finished, then I'll go back to getting the other book completed. But I would say that just write what you can, whatever gets into your head, just even if it's rubbish, just write it down. You can always edit.
You could always edit, and I always say, don't edit while you're writing. Just keep it flowing while you can. Some people I know are fortunate enough to plan a writer's retreat, and they might go away someplace or to something that's inspiring. If you could go anywhere in the world that you think might inspire or inform you on your next book, Debbie, where would you go?
Oh gosh, I never even thought about that. I have no idea.
That's fun. You go to the setting. I've said that to working with writers. Pretend to be one of your characters. Go to the right place. Get into that world. Certainly with fantasy, it's a lot harder. But if you can put yourself in that storyline, if you were going to write something, Cully, you're doing a whole lot with mythology. I don't know if you want to go on an archaeological dig and find some of these things yourself.
As you were speaking, I was thinking, I just want to go somewhere old, but I'd want to go somewhere old even if I wasn't writing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I like anything I like all the ancient stuff. I like uncovering mysteries and trying to work out. I think we're connected to our past, aren't we? And it's like a mystery, trying to work out who we are, where we came from, why we believe the things we do now.
Do you have a favorite old place?
I've not traveled anywhere really. I suppose the most ancient place I've been is I went to Malta, and there was some Neolithic, like a temple there. That was probably the oldest thing I've been to. But I would love to go to the where Mesopotamia was in the ancient Near East, but I don't think it's really safe enough to travel there.
No, but I love, as an American, just being in Europe, everything is old as compared to America.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, goodness gracious, you have, I can go out for a cup of coffee and it's in a building older than anything in America.
I went to Georgia, and Georgia reminded me a bit of London.
Oh, interesting.
It had like quite old architecture. I don't know much about the history of America, but it did remind me a bit of London.
Not nearly as old as London, though.
But London's not that old, because obviously it burnt down and they rebuilt it.
The cloisters is wonderful.
Absolutely. We do have a couple of old things. You're right, Debbie. So Cully is going for something old. Melody, where are you going to go on your writer's retreat to get inspired or get immersed for your next book? Where would you go if money were no object and there was no pandemic? Where would you be?
If money was no object, I would go straight to Scotland, and I've done a lot of research about these specific towns, like near Inverness, Scotland, where I've had like ancestors all the way back to like the 1500s, and I would love to see different spots and just get an area of that. I've been to Costa Rica, which I'm not Spanish at all. It'd be cool to go to where some of my ancestors were from.
Absolutely.
Get inspiration, because a lot of that really brings into the Appalachian roots, to music, to storytelling, a lot of that stuff would be the farming. So it'd be cool to see how that got passed down.
Fabulous. Melody, I might have to give you my mother as a traveling companion. She is an Outlander junkie.
Oh,
absolute Outlander junkie.
Yeah.
So Debbie, did you have any thoughts about where you're going to go with that unlimited money so you can go on a writer's retreat?
There's a lot of places I'd like to go personally. And I mean, I was thinking one day to go to Italy. I'd love going there. The only place, well, I've been to Canada. I haven't gone to Montreal. I'd love to go there. And I've been to England. I have been to London. But other than that, I haven't really been out of the U.S. I have been a lot on the East Coast. I went out to California right before the pandemic, and that was Northern California. I enjoyed that. I still want to go to the Grand Canyon one day, so that's something else.
And there might be a mystery story about the mystery of the Grand Canyon.
Well, I have in my Cobble Cove series, for the number 6, which I'm hoping to start one day soon. I have a scenario where they go to Hollywood because they're filming one of the books. In the books, they're writing mysteries. Besides Alicia now, working at the library, she's also a mystery author with her husband. So I have that scenario, or I have Disney World, because in the last book, the one in October, the No Burden, No Gravestone Unturned, they had a family who are now in Florida. So they were thinking of maybe go. So these are different ideas, but that would be good. I've been to Disney World, but not recently.
Well, none of us have been any place recently.
No.
Hopefully that'll all change and we can go visiting old things, new things, and getting some more books written. Well, you all have to promise me that when the next book gets released, you'll let me know so that we can get you back on here on the show. I just want to remind all of our viewers, Cully Mack's A Voice That Thunders. There are 4 already and 1 more on the way. Is that?
Yeah, I've got them here. Look, quickly show you.
Oh, yes.
There's the second one.
Okay. Ooh.
And there's the third one.
Beautiful.
Lovely.
And the 4th one, which hasn't got the girl on it because she's not in that book.
Okay.
She's not dead, but she is. the third and the 4th book are on the same timeline, but different characters.
Gotcha. And the 5th book is coming.
Oh, I'm hoping to get it out by the end of the year, but
All
I'm
right.
a little bit delayed, so I might not.
No worries. The 5th book is on the way, so you will definitely want to get started on that book series. So when the 5th book comes along, you're all ready. And then when you want to read something in a little bit shorter form than 5-volume fantasy, Melody Lipford's Diary of Psalms, Christian Poetry Chapbook is right up your alley. And you'll definitely want to grab a copy of that and get inspired to write your own. And if you're wondering where we were 20 years ago and where we are today, Time's Relative by Debbie D. Louise will remind you that, yeah, there was a time that we didn't have a cell phone in our pocket. And that sounds so much fun to be writing back and forth in time, especially now that you know, prospective readers out there, that she discovered this manuscript now and was able to uncover it and add the little smidges to make it a time travel between two time periods. I love backstory like that. I think that that's just fabulous.
Stephanie, I forgot to add that I found an outline for the sequel. I forgot to tell you that.
Oh, okay.
It hasn't been written. It was the outline. At that time, I was less of a discovery, let me use that. I was less of a discovery writer when I had more time. Before I had my daughter, before I was very busy at the library. But I did find the outline, so I might use some of that if I write the sequel.
Fantastic. Well, when the sequel to that comes out, when Cully's fifth book comes out, and Melody, I have no doubt that there will be more, whether it's another poetry chapbook or an Appalachian tale, whatever it is, we definitely want to hear about it. Thank you so much for joining us, and happy writing to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Between the Covers. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're an author who would be interested in appearing on our show, or perhaps you're a member of a book club, we do host book clubs as well, please visit betweenthecoverstv.com. By the way, at betweenthecoverstv.com, you can watch past episodes in addition to learning more about our authors and guests. So sign up there if you would like to be a guest on the show yourself. And if you have some books that you would like to get written or published, visit redpenguinbooks.com. Thanks so much for joining us.